started coming in here fairly regularly 2 or 3 years ago. It's a place I could come and sit that was well lit and had a table and enough space for me to work. Staff got to know me, and so I'm sort of the only sober patron of the bar, but we're in the dilemma that we're in large part because of what happened in November of 1963. And the reason that we, who were alive and adult at that time, remember exactly where we were is we know what it cost us. In Dallas, Penn Jones had started a moment of silence there in 64, I guess it was, even right away, on the grassy knoll on every November 22nd, and he asked me to continue that tradition there on the knoll, and I have. No, I don't want to use the mic. I want to talk to you. You can come up here and hear me. I have a human voice. I'd like to speak with a human voice at this moment. I was asked by researcher Penn Jones to carry on a tradition of a moment of silence here on the grassy knoll. What happened here, November 22nd, 1963, was not a lone gunman in a window. It was a military coup d'etat and the rise of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about in his final speech. So take a moment of silence and think about that. I still try to think, and I still have hope, and I still believe in people, and I still want to get at the truth, and I hope you do too.
There used to be a symposium, and it was the Assassination Symposium on Kennedy, ASK.
That was a rock group promotion thing called South by Southwest, and for whatever sets of reasons, the people in Dallas, rather than organizing their own conference, brought these people in and had them organize it.
We just, we thought at the end of the day, well, all these people are coming in, they're paying their money at the door, and it's going to rock and roll. We could use this money as like a research fund. Ideally, if you're going to talk about John Kennedy in the fall, all there is in Washington is the archives and a gravesite. That's not the same. You've got to stand where Zapruder stood. You got to do it in Dallas.
So I wanted to say welcome and thank you for coming to this Coalition on Political Assassinations regional meeting in Dallas. We do this meeting every year. We have since '94. We keep pushing at these conferences to get each year the best new evidence and new research, forensic and ballistic medical evidence, and the authors that are doing the good work. And we've got a great lineup this year.
Myself and our research team, it has been our attempt to document...
I'm just trying to work with the people that I consider honest and independent and legitimate and well-informed and scientific and academic researchers.
The issues we have will pop up. And
we used to do peer review and look at abstracts of what people were going to present and decide who could speak and who couldn't. But there were some that we just felt the stuff was speculative and not sort of rising up to the level of looking like research, not just whatever crazy or salacious theory somebody has.
Thank you very much. I also wanted to just say a word about the Camelot revisionism that is happening now. That there is a power struggle within the Democratic leadership for control of the party. Killing Camelot also helps to rid the Kennedys of whatever power they have left inside the Democratic Party. I think that's all I have to say. Is that okay?
Welcome. I'm happy to see you all here. I know that you're sincere. I know you're dedicated. Deborah, would you like to wave with you? This is Deborah Conway, just to put a name.
In 1995, another organization put on a conference in Washington, D.C., a big conference with big names.
With Dean Acheson, former Secretary of State under Truman and one of the wise men of the era.
These people did not make newcomers feel welcome. There was a club, the door was shut, the door was locked, and you didn't get in. Maybe you don't understand that it's not all about the speaker, that it's about the audience too, and your audience are the ones who are going to buy these books and buy these tapes. I think it was probably even the next year or the one after that Mary surprised me. She said, I'm giving the rights to her chronology of Lee Oswald and her database to JFK Lancer because I trust them and because I know that they will give it to anybody. If it's some PhD or if it's a high school student writing a report, that was a shock that went out through the community, that she backed us totally. I took everything I knew about my organization skills and my people skills to put on the Lancer November in Dallas conference.
I actually had a dream that I was able to go to the Oval Office early 1963 and to visit with him. And, gee, what do you ask the president? In a long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation.
We'll have our moment of silence at 12:30, where I'd like for you to turn and face the road, and we'll imagine the day when President Kennedy was assassinated here in Dealey Plaza.
Oh, say, can you see?
What I do with JFK Lancer is I give a face to the research community with our website and our events, and I give them voice. I give them the conference and the website, and I publish their books and their research, and it gets their voices out to the world.
And the home of the brave.
When this event started years ago, it was more or less an experiment. We didn't really know whether it would be a success. And I think those of you who have been to these seminars before know that they're always very enjoyable.
Been to Dallas more times than I can remember. I've been interested in this case from the moment it happened in 1963. From the very start, like a lot of my compatriots in England, we thought there's something wrong. This is not just a lone nut killing this man. There's more to it than that.
President Kennedy was also held in great regard in Britain as well, and I think it wasn't only an American event. I think it affected the whole world.
I firmly believe that there were other things related to the JFK case, his brother and Martin Luther King, because I believe the same people that assassinated JFK did those as well.
We are all working together to try and find if we can get to the bottom of this thing, because we do believe that we weren't told the truth in 1964.
President Anderson, members of the faculty, Board of Trustees.
We do a commemorative event also in June. It marks the day that John F. Kennedy gave his talk saying we have to stop this arms race, we have to stop threatening the existence of the planet.
What kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana forced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time.
For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish
our children's future, and we're all one. He called then for an end to the arms race and the nuclear testing into an arms treaty.
And that, I think, was really the speech that precipitated his assassination.
We must labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but towards a strategy of peace.
The bill before us today, S.J. Res. 282, title is the Assassination Materials Disclosure Act of 1992.
When the review board convened in 1994, they instructed other federal agencies to hang on to their records because they were going to be demanding them and processing them for declassification.
The Secret Service, the day that they were supposed to turn in their materials to the review board, they destroyed them and said, they're gone. We don't have them. We destroyed them.
That was illegal under the act. Any record, once the act was passed, nothing was to be destroyed.
The review board was apoplectic over this, but in the end decided not to make a big public stink in their first year of operation against an agency like the Secret Service. And so they noted it in their final report that this had happened and left it at that. That's for real. One thing you won't find in the documents is the magic secret code that says the government knows who killed Kennedy and here it is in our 40-page report. That's not how things worked. There's huge varieties of interesting clues along the way, some of which just go nowhere, some of which lead you to other things. And then there are the occasional eye-popping moments. One of them was early versions of the Warren Report, which had been written in draft form and presented to commissioners.
It is the view of the commission, as expressed in the report, that it probably did occur that there was a single bullet conclusion.
So the single bullet is crucial. And it was Arlen Specter who first came to the conclusion that the same bullet hit Kennedy and Connolly. And this is the bullet Specter and the commission say wounded two men. The Warren Commission said that one bullet hit Kennedy at the back of his neck. It passed through his throat and nicked his tie as it came out. It then went on into Governor Connolly's back. Now smashed through Connolly, smashed a rib, and came out below his breast, just below the nipple. And it wasn't finished yet. The bullet then hit his right wrist, tore through part of it, and then lodged in his left thigh. And this is the bullet that was supposed to have done all this.
The single bullet theory says that the bullet came through Kennedy's neck, didn't hit any bone, went right on down, hit Connolly, caused all of his wounds, and that way they can have all of these wounds attributed to one bullet, and then they got the one that missed, and then they got the one that hit Kennedy in the head. So there's your three shots, and you've got to have three shots to make the single assassin theory work. If there's a fourth shot, then we're into conspiracy and multiple shooters.
Gerald Ford himself, the future president, had written in changes to the descriptions of Kennedy's wound In an early version of the report,
Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin. We said that the commission had found no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic.
He actually changed the text in the report to move the wound in JFK's back to a position at the base of his neck, which is very significant for the simple reason that if you raise the entrance wound to the neck, you of course make the single bullet theory more plausible.
And that one small change of wording is what has allowed them to argue that cockamamie single bullet theory.
These guys were very conscious of the problems they were having, with the trajectory of this magic bullet.
People ask, why do you have Arlen Specter, Gerald Ford, and Emmett Kelly together? Well, they have one thing in common. 3 clowns.
and it showed that the Warren Commission was willing to fudge the wording to make their case seem more plausible.
The House Select Committee on Assassination said, well, we've gone and interviewed the witnesses at the autopsy, and it turns out that the doctors in Dallas were wrong. All the witnesses at the autopsy said that there was no hole in the back of his head, and that his wounds looked just like they look in the autopsy photographs. Where are the interviews? We'd like to see them. Well, they didn't come out until the Assassination Records Review Board released them in the early mid-1990s. And guess what? The witnesses at the autopsy described the wounds exactly as the witnesses at Dallas had, that he had a hole in the back of his head. So the House Select Committee on Assassination had falsified his own interviews to be consistent with the autopsy conclusions that they wanted to reach, that Oswald could have done it. They lied. You couldn't even trust the pro-conspiracy House Select Committee on Assassinations to tell you the full truth.
Another set of documents that was found, which is quite an eye-popper, is the so-called Operation Northwoods documents.
Which was a plan by the Joint Chiefs to create a traumatic incident that would terrorize the public and then could be blamed on Castro and could be then used as an excuse to invade Cuba. And this involved
shootings on the streets of Miami and Washington, D.C.,
blowing up a ship in Guantanamo Bay,
blowing up a drone airliner and pretending that it was a real airliner over Cuba in such a way it could be blamed on Castro.
With fake obituaries sent to the local papers.
These would be orchestrated in sequence as part of an effort to blame them on Castro and to be used as a pretext for invading Cuba.
The rush to judgment was really the beginning by J. Edgar Hoover, who that day said Oswald did it and did it alone.
Among those records is a document on the afternoon of November 22nd after the shooting, but well before any full-scale investigation or conviction or anything else happened. J. Edgar Hoover wrote a letter to his investigative staff and called Robert Kennedy and said, we have the man that shot the president and there's nothing else behind it.
This is the president of the United States. A lot of people had reasons to kill him. How can you say the first day there was no conspiracy? You can if you start with the preconception that we're going to say Oswald did it alone and we don't care what the evidence shows.
Another important record that came out was a memo from Assistant and then Acting Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach to Bill Moyers, who was a press aide to Lyndon Johnson. The memo said that the public needs to be convinced that Oswald acted alone, that the evidence against him would have convicted him in court even if he hadn't been killed, and that there was a lone individual acting on just his own behalf. This was a memo on November 25th, the day of Kennedy's funeral and burial.
These documents didn't just sort of fall one day from the sky. They were dug kicking and screaming out of federal agencies.
We know now from the documents there was basically a COINTELPRO operation against the researchers to discredit them, to try to back up the phony conclusion, lest it go where it would go.
The CIA wrote out a lengthy memo to station chiefs all over the world.
The CIA document is number 1035-960. And 1035-960 talks about how they're going to counter the works of people like myself by using propaganda assets in the media.
They certainly viewed public's disbelief of the Warren Report with concern and provided point-by-point rebuttal points.
We're all communists, we're all in it for the money.
One of the mentions in this document is that they should label these people conspiracy theorists. It's the beginning of the etymology of those two words being joined at the hip, so that now we're in an era where there is no conspiracy that isn't a theory.
It's a very, very powerful and important document. It shows how they did it.
Most Americans still believe in a conspiracy. The idea that a lone assassin could kill the president, a man so widely revered, that idea was simply too much to bear.
They would rather see that, oh yes, there was always a system. There was always some overriding explanation that can let us make sense of the world.
We'll tell you why conspiracy theorists are having a field day.
What sort of person do you think is the average person that believes in a conspiracy theory?
A really paranoid person.
Conspiracies have not gone away because they are too ideologically and I think emotionally satisfying to the people who espouse them.
Because I think it's very difficult for them to accept the idea that someone as inconsequential as Oswald could have killed someone as consequential as Kennedy.
I don't know where they come up with this pop psychology nonsense. Well, I'm sorry. I don't fluff my pillow at night and sleep easily with the thought that this was no lone nut. This was a conspiracy of vast proportion that took over the government and killed my president. Boy, I can sleep well now.
You know, after all, I look around the room and what do I see? A bunch of conspiracy nuts. But you know what? For nuts, y'all look kind of normal. You look kind of regular. You look like everybody else that I see every day. Because we're not nuts. Why? Because we don't believe what our government told us?
I think to dismiss everyone as a whole as being kooks or nuts is just an insult. It's just a a slang way of saying I don't want to know enough about this, and I don't care that you know.
You know, there's a certain human nature to the whole thing. I mean, I don't have children, but if I had a teenage daughter and the police came to my house and said, you know, Walt, we found your daughter dead in a dumpster. It'd be the worst thing I ever heard in my life. And I'd eventually be able to pull myself together enough and say, can you tell me what happened? Well, we're not sure. It's either a psycho that got loose from an asylum or a bunch of Hell's Angels, gang raped her and killed her. I'm going to pray that it's the guy from the asylum. But it was just one of those things that can't be avoided. It happened, it's tragic, but it's not the other alternative, so to speak. It's not a systemic thing taking her away from me. It's an accident. Lee Oswald is the accident. Conspiracy is the systemic. And people they'd rather think accident. It's more comfortable, it's more convenient.
Pretty much the library and work area, and also was the COPA office. This section is mostly intelligence history. This section right here is JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King books that I got while I was with COPA, and others are just personal books. I'm kind of an eclectic reader, but I have a lot of topics and authors that I focus on and collect. They say, like, well, if this is true, why haven't they killed you? And I said, well, it's kind of a rude question. I mean, there's probably no other lecturer that ever gets that question. You just to go to the Azalea Society and they raise their hand at the end of your talk and say, well, why haven't they killed you?
The role of the media in the Kennedy assassination investigation is bizarre and frightening.
It's a mystery why the media hasn't been more active in the case. I think partly it's institutional. The major media in New York, from the New York Times on down, lined up with the Warren Report on day one, and to say after all these years, oh, by the way, we were wrong, would be a pretty big admission.
One is personal. I think some journalists are just defensive. They don't like the idea of people outside their profession knowing more than they do about a topic that they've been tasked to write about.
In my experience, journalists tend to be fairly busy people that, unlike historians, don't spend months and months and months on something.
The evidence was so confusing and recalcitrant
that it would take a long, long time. And they didn't have a long, long time.
But it's remarkable to me that preposterous statements were being made by people in the news media. And nobody was asking any questions, not even asking questions. That's the problem. That's what the media is supposed to do.
They bought into the lie in the first place.
The New York Times and all of the major news media, they bought into it before there was a chance for anybody to scrutinize, to criticize, to dissect. They would not do this in the Jones case in New York City or the Smith case in Pittsburgh or so on. But in this case, rush to judgment.
Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine with a history of connection with left-wing causes.
It's just an indication of how outrageous the times were and how terrified everybody was.
Given, but I emphatically deny these charges. What you see is an absolute, complete sellout of journalistic ethics.
But it's of the interest for the American media to prove the Warren Commission was right, because if so, then they have not failed in their duty.
Dan Rather was an up-and-coming reporter for CBS here in Dallas at the time of the assassination. On Sunday morning, he was the one who was bidding on the Zapruder film for CBS TV.
We got a chance to see probably the first showing of the Zapruder film, Abram Zapruder's footage that showed the assassination.
As soon as he was out of the bidding, he ran back to CBS, out of breath, just sweating and just... And he gets on national television and tells people he has just seen the film of the assassination.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Now, no matter where the shot came from, there's absolutely no question the president was not thrown forward. He was thrown violently to the rear. But it's quite clear what was going on. They were trying to make it sound as if the shot came from behind and pushed the president forward. And it didn't happen. And he knew it didn't happen. But he got on TV and lied to the American public.
A second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
He built his whole career, became the CBS News anchor, all because he was Mr. Reliable and did exactly what Lyndon Johnson and the rest of the government wanted.
CBS News, for a number of years, kept screening investigation after investigation. However, those investigations were comprehensively biased.
The Warren Report was backed by CBS TV on the day of its release. They weren't supposed to have it, but they obviously did, because the day it was released, they were in the middle of a 2-hour special dealing with it, item by item.
Did he own the rifle and pistol used in the double murders? Did he actually try to kill retired General Edwin Walker?
The day it was released, nobody could read the Warren Report and do 2 hours worth of TV special in half an hour, 45 minutes. Yet there it was. It's a matter of history.
I can't honestly say that I've ever been completely relieved of the fact that there might have been international connections.
You mean you still feel that there might have been?
Well, I have not completely discounted.
Well, you ask yourself why. Well, who ran CBS? Bill Paley. Who was Bill Paley? Well, he was a founding member of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was a loyalist. He created their policy, and nobody, even the great Walter Cronkite, would ever dare challenge his edict. And his edict was, we're going to back the Warren Commission, and they did.
The Church Committee, the United States Senate, investigated the relationship between the government and the news media.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal.
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
And it was appalled to see that so many people who were supposed to be reporters were actually on the payroll of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, Carl Bernstein, who's the reporter that, along with Bob Woodward, did the Watergate stories, wrote a Rolling Stone article, and he revealed that up to 400 specific reporters that he knew of were being used as CIA assets in the national press. He quoted one intelligence agent saying that one reporter was worth 20 agents.
When I was a kid, we never would have believed anything like this was possible. And maybe it was happening. But if so, we didn't know it. The church committee told us.
Now there's been a series of grossly dishonest documentaries, Unsolved History, they're called. There's 3 or 4 of them, and a few others. The special that Peter Jennings did before he died. They are just grossly dishonest. They don't deal with any of the real facts.
Good evening, I'm Peter Jennings. There is no other murder in history that has produced as much speculation as the Kennedy assassination. And it would be impossible in the 2 hours we have to examine the incredible number of conspiracy theories. But unless you are an irredeemable conspiracy theorist, beyond the pale, so to speak, what we will do tonight is demonstrate that those theories are wrong.
President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain.
They don't deal with any of the real facts. Every one of them has ignored the testimony of the Dallas doctors, which is important, really important stuff.
Gunshot wound in the brain. Dr. Berkeley told me it's a simple matter, Tom, of a bullet right through the head.
And they just pretend that those statements don't exist. Every Dallas doctor said the president was shot from the right front. Yet the other side just ignores it completely.
Right through the head.
That's what we get as evidence or conclusion about historical reality. I mean, any academic historian would laugh his head off at that kind of nonsense. It's nothing but propaganda and mush. And not only because it doesn't take the other facts into account, but because the stuff they put up as evidence is so flimsy.
Those of us who have worked on this project know that millions of people, all these years later, still have a hard time accepting that it was Oswald alone. William Manchester, who wrote Death of a President, identified this yearning for a better answer. If, he says, to use an odd metaphor,
you put 6 million murdered Jews on one side of the scale and the Nazi regime on the other, you have a rough balance. Greatest crime, greatest criminals. But if you put the murdered president on one side of the scale and that wretched waif Oswald, as Manchester calls him, on the other, it doesn't balance. You want to add some weight to Oswald, it would invest the president's death with meaning. Kennedy would have died for something. Manchester says a conspiracy would do the job nicely.
I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.
Nothing like pillow at night. The main idea that you heard over and over and over tonight is that what all of us are about is people that can't accept the idea that a lone nut could have killed a famous and wonderful president. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know anybody in the research community that ever started their work based on that thought or any thought like it. All of us went to the record, we went to the evidence, we looked at the facts, and that's what led us to the conclusion.
This has been a CBS News Extra.
The press that should be our hero now and is our only hope is still failing us. We deserve a lot more than that.
They just don't understand the severity of what actually happened. The history of the world changed at that moment, right on that spot.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if the press really lived up to the vision of the Fourth Estate?
Ever since the beginning, there has been this idea that you have to attack and, let's say, smear the people who have been trying to find out what really happened.
Some of them are honest and well-meaning, and then you've got some people who have an agenda.
They've become known as the counter-critics. They're people who are paid to put out disinformation.
They've always been there to muddy the waters.
Many of them are authors. They're people that will write books that will attempt to counter the good work that's been done by the real critical community.
The biggest debunking books to come along right after the Stone movie was Case Closed by Gerald Posner.
What do you think of Posner, huh? Good boy.
We've never had in this country, the American public has never had a reason to understand why Oswald ended up on the 6th floor of the depository shooting at Kennedy.
I mean, the great problem is he's a lawyer. As Socrates pointed out in the Apology, they make the weaker case appear the stronger. That's what they're good at. That's what they do. And that's what Posner did.
The release of his books coincided with the release of the files. So the theme was that day, files are open, the case is closed, when in fact exactly the opposite was true.
It's grossly dishonest, horribly dishonest. And where do you begin when dealing with Posner's book? He has diagrams of Oswald leaving the window, the sniper's nest window, and walking unobstructed straight across diagonally on the 6th floor. What about the thousands, literally thousands of cartons of books that were blocking the way? But he shows the 6th floor being totally empty. And he got away with all this crap. And of course, he was the media darling.
Posner's work got reviewed by Time, Newsweek, huge speaking tours, got all the publicity, okay?
They, of course, gave it glowing reviews, as did every media stooge.
You know, I can remember Katie Couric sitting with Gerald Posner with a cup of coffee in her hand and said, Gerald, you just did tons and tons and tons of research. What do you think we didn't do tons of research? I mean, of course we did.
Looking at the camera and just lying about whatever issue happens to come up. He's their expert on everything.
You have Vincent Bugliosi's new, supposedly definitive work on that.
But it's almost mind-boggling that you could adhere to the Lone Assassin book and write a book of that length.
I mean, Bugliosi's has put together a gigantic, a mammoth book.
I think it's 1,600 pages and then 900 pages of supplementary notes. I find very, very little new that's in that book. It's also very much padded because a lot of this stuff doesn't have to do anything with the Kennedy case. There's a lot about JFK's life. There's a history of the mafia.
To say, I believe what they said, isn't it obvious to all of you? Did you really need 1,000+ pages to do that?
The last thing they want to be doing is reading a 1,300-page book by Ms. Bugliosi.
And it really is so intellectually abominable, so emotionally disturbing that people who should know better, people of intelligence and education, like Posner and Bugliosi, they are educated, intelligent people, that they go out of their way to try to construct and reconstruct and shall I say, rejuvenate and refortify the defenses that were built around the Warren Commission report ab initio from the very beginning.
It's a book for the ages, and the Philadelphia Inquirer said 100 years from now that this is the book that historians are going to look to. So it's the book on the case.
Whenever someone will come out and back them up and say, no, there was no conspiracy, Oswald acted alone, Ray acted alone, then it lets them off the hook. And so they promote those books.
Oh, it's not hard to understand that. that when somebody comes out and says or does or writes something, again, attacking the Warren Commission, why they don't get any play?
Did Max Holland review it? I mean, his bias is so overwhelming and shows so completely.
Max Holland wrote a big piece for The Nation magazine, saying, in essence, the CIA didn't do it. The CIA is innocent, and everybody's lying about the CIA. And he's described in Nation magazine as a writer for Nation magazine. Max Holland is the official writer for the Central Intelligence Agency on the Kennedy assassination. And this is how they do it. Now we have Max Holland writing article after article. It all starts with the Central Intelligence Agency, and they launder it through groups like The Nation.
We're the W.R. Pogue Legislative Library at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. We're a political materials library and collect anything related to the political process. We have the papers of 12 U.S. congressmen, ancillary collections such as the Kennedy Research Assassination Collection, and we are a center for collecting papers about the Kennedy research. Once we got the Penn Jones papers, Jack White in Fort Worth.
This is Ben Rogers. He comes every year.
I spoke every year at COPA and at JFK Lancer about the library and what we're doing with the papers.
It's a valuable collection here of early researchers like Penn Jones and Jack White, and later ones like John Armstrong, R.B. Cutler did extensive work. Mary Farrell's papers are coming here. So, for me, it's a treasure trove. I mean, I could live in this place, and bury myself in it. I did for many years. To see them again brings back memories of the people, because I knew these researchers. They were friends of mine, and talked to them and saw the processes they went through to write the books and what their thinking was.
We're hoping to keep this going and provide an archive for people to research the Kennedy assassination.
I hope that there's enough interest in the public still in the Kennedy assassination that younger people would want to come here and take a look at this and find out about real history from the people on the ground that looked at this and tried to figure it out.
One of the sadnesses of this case is that almost all the books have been written by attorneys.
And historians have been absent without leave on the case. It's certainly true that this is sort of a third rail for historians. I think they know instinctively that it's a black hole, that it's a very controversial event with a huge amount of material. But I think it's also obvious to anyone who's a historian that if you were to research this and then reach the wrong conclusion, you would be pilloried by your peers who have pretty much lined up behind the government's version of the case. So what's in it for an historian to really get into this?
They're basically bourgeois intellectuals who want to keep their academic, and in some cases government positions. They come in and out of government doing this stuff. And that they'll just say, like, well, I'm not one of those. I'm not like those guys over there. You can trust me. I don't believe in conspiracies. We can ill afford to let our history die. The effect of the national security state and all this propaganda is that our real history has been stolen from us, hidden from us. And without knowing our history, we can't act. Martin Schatz, an early critic, wrote that the political paralysis in America is based on the fact that we're allowed to believe anything, but to know nothing. And when you can't know, you cannot act.
The past is prologue, and until we understand what's happened and what we did do right or wrong, or what we didn't do right or wrong, it's very hard to have a barometer to know what we should be doing in the future.
In the larger picture, I think we're still in this funny conundrum where, even though more and more at least has come out in detail showing the fraudulence of the official version of events, it hasn't changed what's in the history books and you name it. And in fact, if anything, as time has gone by more recently, there is enough distance from the event and few enough people remember the facts of the case that it's easier to argue the Warren Report all over again, because people don't know what was wrong with it in the first place.
The world would have been a very, very different place had Kennedy not been assassinated. Many people think, well, why are you talking about this case now? It's ancient history. Well, it's not. It's still relevant today. Things which are happening today stem from incidents like the Kennedy assassination.
The predominant paradigm in this country is that things happen due to incompetence, not malice, not evil. And that the government is basically benign. It may hurt someone inadvertently, but it would never do something as outrageous as kill its own president. But there's other paradigms out there.
This was a coup d'etat. This was the overthrow of the government. Something that we as Americans can accept, even without question, in Western democracies.
We got people running for office now, and they're talking about assassinations yet again. People should not believe that if you kill the president, that's okay, you can get away with it. It's not like anything serious like stealing a loaf of bread.
More important is the lessons we can draw for today around how an event like this can have misinvestigations by the federal government take place, and then how the rest of the organs of society can line it behind them.
What good is history if you're lied to? Keep the faith. We owe that to our 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. He was our president, and he was taken from us not in a recall or not in a vote. He was taken from us with a bullet.
Are we ever going to see a prosecution in the Kennedy case? No, of course not.
Will the government ever hold a news conference and some official get up and say, okay, here's what really happened? No.
But will we ever know the whole truth? I can't see any way that we ever will. I truly can't. And that saddens me.
There's too much at stake here. It's going to take another generation or two before everybody is gone from the scene.
I still don't know what happened. I still don't know who did it. I still don't know why they did it. And I don't know if I ever will. And that's a very disturbing thought.
A lot of people like to play the game, even within the research community, that we'll never know. But I think that's silly. I mean, I think that it's an empirical question and we can know.
Sooner or later, the truth comes out. Sometimes people find it, sometimes it just oozes. And, whoa, look at that. And there it is.
The attempt to get to the bottom of everything related to the Kennedy assassination, I think, is part of that larger struggle for truth, as it were.
If you really have a democracy, and if the truth is a tough truth, the public can deal with it. Always have.
It may be too late for justice in this case, but it's never too late for the truth. And it's up to people like myself to keep the case alive.
By pulling our energies together and working together, we can make changes. I mean, we've gotten releases of documents that have rewritten the whole history.
White, black, Asian, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, rich, medium, poor, north, south. You know, I don't care. You break it down any way you want to. The American public stands firm. And it's not because of the eloquence or fervor or passion of me and all of my critic, researcher, colleagues, and scholars. We could not have carried the day against those kinds of odds. What carried the day is plain old common sense.
And we all do pray we're wrong. We'd rather be wrong than right. You know, we'd rather not have to live in the world that evidence takes us to, you know, because it's not a happy conclusion. On the other hand, if I had to live in a world where I felt that I couldn't know the truth, that I couldn't know anything, that would be disturbing to me.
But if somebody had knocked on a door in the midst of all of that horror and said, listen, Walt, the day is going to come when you're going to say, it's amazing, but the vast majority of my best friends are people who are my best friends because of that day. And that day holds us together like a family, like glue. We may do as families sometimes do, but at the end of the day, we're still family.
We have all the potential in the world and all the tools that we need to envision what's right. That's the job of every generation. Even if we don't think will win. We must try. If I was to write a book now about what our problems are, what the situation we're in, I think I would title it an old Dylan line. There must be some way out of here, said the joker to the thief. There's so much confusion. I can't get no relief. The businessmen, they drink my wine. The plowmen dig my earth. But none of them along the line know what any of it is worth. Well, no need to get excited now, the thief, he kindly spoke. There are many of those among us who think that life is but a joke. But you and I, we've been through that, and that is not our fate. So let us not speak falsely now. The hour is getting late.